I've heard that even after getting the vaccine, you will still have to quarantine from some jobs if you come into contact with someone with COVID. If the vaccine is meant to stop the spread, then why are people having to quarantine after contact? Shouldn't it increase your immunity to being even a carrier?
Mhm. That's a tough one.
So,
Anybody want to jump in?
I'm happy to lead us off if you guys want.
Right.
Feel free to jump in and add or correct anything you see fit. But I think the takeaway here is it's sort of like running up a score, right? Um, Winning is about winning. It's not about winning gracefully, right? So 95% success means 1 out of 20 people it doesn't work for, right? At least not noticeably. So extrapolate 1 out of 20 to 320 million people in the United States. There is a chunk of people that this won't work for, and it doesn't mean it isn't a successful vaccine. It's a highly successful vaccine. It means 5% of 320 million people it could potentially fail for, right? And we don't know which of the 20 it is, and this is assuming that it's the Moderna and the Pfizer, right? So because we can't be sure, we want to run up the score. Everyone gets vaccinated, everyone quarantines, everyone wears masks, everyone social distances, and we can end this thing. If we assume that 95% is 100% and everyone starts taking their masks off and congregating and doing whatever they want because they've been vaccinated, this will propagate the virus even at a slower rate than non-vaccination, but it will still propagate the virus faster than if we kept all of our safety mechanisms in place, right?
Yeah.
This is like saying we have airbags in cars. Why do we need seatbelts? And the answer is because no system is perfect. So we want to be redundant. Maybe in one crash, the airbag is perfectly fine, but in the others, we want to have the airbag and your seatbelt, right? So I think it's the overkill is underrated approach, which is just because you've been vaccinated doesn't mean you're the one it took for, or even if it did, let's just everyone wear masks. Let's just everyone be extra safe and let's nip this thing in the bud. Let's run up the score.
I'll push back a little bit on that one, and only because I don't know if you guys are aware, but the CDC has actually updated its recommendations, right? So if you have been it's a weird combo, but effectively, it's if you have had 2 doses of your vaccine and you're 2 weeks out from the second dose, and you're within 3 or 4 months of that timeline, and you are told that you have come in contact with somebody with COVID, you are now they no longer suggest you quarantine. If you've been vaccinated, you're not that's not in the CDC recommendations any longer. And I think that's reflective. I mean, this is something that we can probably talk about as a group. But I think there's a version of this where there's a scientific answer and then there's a public health answer, and they don't always line up, right? I think once you're vaccinated, I think the evidence is pretty clear that that's the best protection you're gonna get, right? Like you're not gonna get better. That's sort of wherever you'll be, and as Tom said, you are rolling the dice a little bit, but there's no version where you get a better roll. It'll always be 95%. But on the flip side, unless everybody's going to start carrying around cards that say I've been vaccinated, how do you know, right? When somebody walks in, whether they are vaccinated or not, right? Do you just take them at their word? And so there's a little bit of this that's public health and public reaction management, and there's part of it that's science, right? That's sort of the scientific side of things. So for example, I would say if I were vaccinated in my own life, I don't really see the necessity to wear a mask or social distance any longer. On the flip side, I will not stop doing it because there's a public aspect of it as well, right? So I would not consider myself a danger any longer, but I also am playing a role in keeping sort of public order while everybody gets vaccinated. And I think that's kind of the mix. Is there have been a lot of times where I've seen people like wearing the scientist hat and then they're wearing the public health hat and they don't tell you when they've switched hats. And so you end up kind of going, well, where's the science behind that? And the answer is it's not really a science answer. It's a public health and sort of public behavior answer. But I don't know what you guys think. I mean, that's obviously my own opinion that might draw some heat. So fair
No,
warning.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that, right, like where we are now, it's definitely, it's what, less 10, 20, maybe we're getting close to 20% of the population has been vaccinated. And, so it's not the majority by far, which is what we would need, for like effective control. There's still, widespread cases in the community. So I think, even after you get vaccinated, it's still, in the public health, for those reasons, it's smart to wear your mask. And then I think for given states, there's different recommendations on what happens if you do come into contact with a positive case, but you've already been vaccinated. It's a little bit of a gray area right now, but I think all of it is, just trying to, like Tom said, have as many safeguards as we can, while we're still like in the process of getting things under control. And then once cases start dropping, then you can start being a little bit more flexible in some of these areas too.
One of the things that came to mind when Chris, you were talking about the science versus the public health answer, is when Texas decided that they were going to reopen everything. I know they got a lot of heat for that. Is that reopening sort of the science answer, and they're expecting people to still be responsible and still, just because you don't have to wear a mask doesn't mean you shouldn't type deal? Is that sort of the vibe you got from that, or do you guys have different takes on that?
I don't know. It's a good question. I generally tend to think not a lot of anything that anybody has done has been particularly science driven. I think there's another game going on that, like, you wear the phrase "the science" as a shield, but it's not about the science. It's about whatever other pressure you're under, right? You're trying to look good in front of the camera. You're trying to signal to people, whatever you want to call it. The truth is, I don't know what's going to happen with Texas. Tom and I were talking about this the other day, and I think this is it's an experiment. Right now, a lot of people don't want to be part of a human experiment, but it is an experiment. And I think one of the biggest failings I've seen during the COVID period is that people never circle back, right? So let's draw a line in the sand now, right? Let's ask public officials what's going to happen. Predict it for me, right? And then in a month, let's come back and say, okay, you said X, Y, or Z would happen. Did it happen or not? And if it didn't, then I need you to update your model. Right? There's something wrong with the way you're perceiving everything. It's okay. We all made, you're making assumptions in your model and how you thought things were going to play out, but something is wrong with your model. Or you were totally right, at which point you should continue to make predictions. But I've seen a lot of things where you sort of just get to throw something at the wall and then nobody ever asks you about it again, right? Like, a month later, people don't come back and say, like, so you said unicorns are going to rain out of the sky on March 15th. And then March 15th rolled around, no unicorns, right? What happened? Like, can you explain to me what went wrong? So I don't know, truth be told, what's going to happen. If I had to make a bet, kind of guessing on the data, and I'm happy to have people come back and rub my face in this one if I'm wrong. I don't, kind of looking at other states, I don't think Texas will do a whole lot, will not do much more, will not have a sort of a different response than its neighbors. I think it'll probably end up playing out sort of similarly. Now, whether that's because people are still wearing their masks, they're still complying, they're still a little bit skittish about going in restaurants, I don't know. I don't know the details of it. But I think if you kind of look at states versus their neighboring states, they all seem to kind of run together. So I don't know, but I think there's a good discussion to be had there. And I think that's something that I personally would like to see at the end of this, is somebody and kind of a group of people going through and kind of doing an autopsy of what happened and what was done, and being honest about what worked and what didn't work, right? If we're not gonna look at the data and say, look, this didn't work, then next time this happens, we're gonna do it again, right? If everybody believes it worked, we're just going to do it, right? Because why wouldn't you do what you believed worked? But if nobody's going to sit down and go, okay, this worked, that didn't work, then we won't, that's the scientific method, right? That's what science is. Science is making a guess. It's that chart that everybody got in elementary school, right? Make a hypothesis, design an experiment, ask the question, look at the results. Then we lose the last step, update your hypothesis, right? Go back to the start of the cycle. So I'll be interested to see what happens. So I don't know. I'll let you guys take a stab at it. But that would be my guess, is it'll look similar to its neighbors. I'll bet somebody, a six-pack.
Katie?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to predict, right? And then it's harder to make like informed policy decisions, right? If you're not taking these things into account, right? So, and I think something that's been difficult is, that it has been kind of such a fragmented response, that there's like different criteria in different states about, some states are using like certain benchmarks, and that's what's dictating when things reopen. So I know just personally, I'm in California, so California has like tiers, and there are like certain criteria that you have to meet to move between tiers. So I think in general, I feel like it's been a good approach, but California has still had pretty widespread cases. So how much of a difference did it make? I hope that it made a difference, right? But we don't really know until you kind of go back and look at things retrospectively. So
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with both of them. I think it's going to be incredibly hard to predict. It'll be very interesting one way or the other, whether or not cases spike or they kind of stay the way they are, or at least relative to their neighbors. And I think what Katie and Chris said is right. And just because the state is easing some of their overall restrictions doesn't mean individual vendors will. It doesn't mean people are going to suddenly say, well, the governor said it's cool to take my mask off, so why don't me and about 500 of my best friends go to the bar tonight? People may still implement their own safety mechanism, so it may not immediately translate to a spike in cases. But if we could predict it, we should be in charge. And I don't know that anyone can predict it, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Sounds good. All right.